of the midbrain. Each one has something to bring. So if you have the notes in front of you, then you also see something called the cerebral aqueduct, the para-aqueductal gray matter, the substantia nigra, and the red nucleus. The cerebral aqueduct we should be somewhat familiar with, in that we know it's a passageway for fluid now, okay, for fluid, from third ventricle, okay, to the fourth ventricle. It's the substantia nigra and the red nucleus that may be something we haven't heard of before. Okay? So we'll take a look at substantia nigra. And the red nucleus. If you have notes in front of you there, it says that the substantia nigra is linked to the basal nuclei, okay? And damage here may lead to involuntary skeletal muscle activity. When we were finishing up our talk on the cerebrum, we found that there was the gray matter in the cortex of the cerebrum, and then in the lower portion of the cerebrum, there were nuclei of nerve cell bodies. We found that those nuclei were involved in movement, but oftentimes not so much the voluntary movements that we do as part of being humans in society, but more the involuntary or routine movements that are part of our everyday activities. I gave you the example of sort of holding your arms down or walking with a natural stride. Those movements, okay, associated with the basal nuclei, so we're seeing some sharing of, I guess you could say, purpose between this area here, the brainstem, and higher centers of movement up in the cerebrum. The substantia nigra plays along with controlling basic movements now. The kinds of movements that don't take a lot of thought on your part. Okay? The red nucleus is kind of an interesting one. It says in your notes a relay nuclei, or relay nuclei for some descending motor pathways, part of the reticular formation. Okay? So it says descending pathways. Okay? First thing we look at, it says descending pathways. So now we're talking about motor input that's coming down from above, passing through this area. There's an interesting story to tell you about the red nucleus. The red nucleus is part of what's called the cerebellar comparator function. It is a slide that comes later if we're lucky enough to see it. Okay? The cerebellar comparator function uses information that passes from the cerebrum to understand what movement is planned by the cerebrum so that the cerebellum can then help out with that movement and make adjustments. Okay? So there's going to be a pathway from above where the voluntary movements are planned down through the red nucleus over to the cerebellum. And if you know where the midbrain is, there are linkages from the midbrain to the cerebellum. Remember, the cerebellum's back here. And remember, its primary job is skilled movements, okay, and some routine type movements. Okay? So the information passes down through the red nucleus. It's still going to pass down to the muscles to get movement to occur. But the cerebellum finds out about what the planned movement is. It then collects up information about how the movement is actually going, and then it sends information back to the cerebrum to make changes. So the red nucleus plays a role in the body or the brain or the nervous system checking itself and making sure that the movements are what are intended. So the cerebellum plays along with the cerebrum in making movements that work. Okay? All right, let's check and see if this thing's going to work.